The water of the Persian Gulf is unforgiving, thick with the smell of salt, diesel fuel, and the silent, suffocating tension of a world holding its breath. For decades, the Strait of Hormuz has been the ultimate geopolitical chokepoint, a narrow 21-mile strip of dark water that holds the absolute lifeblood of the global economy. 30% of the world's oil flows through this narrow throat. Whoever controls it controls the world. And for years, the regime in Tehran believed they held the keys to this global engine, using it as a shield, a sword, and the ultimate trump card to hold the West hostage. But the game has just changed. The United States of America has just flipped the board, executed a masterstroke of military and economic strategy, and initiated an operation that will be dissected by military historians for the next 100 years. Iran thought its greatest leverage was the threat of closing the Strait of Hormuz. They never imagined, not in their absolute worst nightmares, that the United States would be the one to lock the door and pocket the key. When diplomatic channels dissolved and ceasefire talks evaporated into the desert air, Washington did not issue another hollow warning. They did not send another strongly worded letter. They sent the United States Navy. Starting at 10 in the morning on April 13th, a total, uncompromising, and unprecedented military blockade was slammed down upon the Strait of Hormuz. The era of Tehran's arbitrary hegemony and reckless blackmail is over. The mandate is crystal clear, and it is backed by the most devastating fighting force in human history. Not a single vessel, whether it is a massive commercial oil tanker, a rusted cargo ship, or an Iranian military asset, regardless of the flag flying on its mast, will pass through these waters without facing the steel wall of the American military. The lock on Hormuz now belongs to Washington. The sheer scale of the American military mobilization currently underway is staggering, shaking the very foundations of the Middle East. Over 50,000 heavily armed, combat-ready United States troops are currently on ultra-high alert across the region. And this is only the vanguard. The Pentagon is fully prepared to double that number. Corridors in the Pentagon and intelligence briefings leaked to the Wall Street Journal suggest that nearly 100,000 American service members could be surged into the crisis center, a massive deployment triggered by the absolute necessity to secure American interests without waiting for a fractured Europe to offer its hesitant support. The sky above the Arabian Peninsula has become a massive orchestrated highway of American air power. Day and night, the horizon roars with the thunder of C-17 Globemaster transport aircraft, their massive cargo bays swallowing entire battalions of elite infantry, armored vehicles, and advanced munitions, delivering them to desert bases. High above them, KC-135 Stratotankers orbit like gas stations in the sky, ensuring that American fighters never have to land, never have to stop patrolling, never have to yield an inch of airspace. At the very heart of this unparalleled projection of power is the legendary USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group. This floating fortress, a marvel of nuclear-powered engineering and sovereign American territory, has dropped anchor in the region and established an impenetrable umbrella of total air dominance. The sky is swarming with the stealthy, radar-evading F-35 Lightning Seconds and the battle-hardened, multi-role FA-18 Super Hornets. They are flying combat air patrols around the clock, their advanced sensors painting every single movement on the Iranian coastline, waiting for one wrong move, one twitch of aggression from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The spark that ignited this powder keg was struck on April 11th, just 48 hours before the president announced the total blockade. The United States sent a message that could not be ignored. The Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, the USS Frankie Peterson Jr. and the USS Michael Murphy, two multi-billion-dollar leviathans of American naval engineering, pierced through the dangerous shallow waters of Hormuz. They did not ask for permission. They did not yield. They carved a path right through the heart of Iran's claimed sphere of influence, forcing open the doors to a terrifying new era of direct confrontation. The reaction from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard was instantaneous, harsh, and utterly alarming. The silence of the Arabian Gulf was suddenly torn apart by a frantic, screaming radio broadcast that broadcast the sheer scale of the crisis to every listening ear in the region. The Iranian operators screamed their final warnings, demanding the American destroyers divert to the Indian Ocean immediately, but the destroyers held their course. American steel does not turn around. That striking radio exchange became the ultimate harbinger that nothing would ever be the same in the Middle East. But the United States is fighting a two-front shadow war. While the world's eyes are locked on the massive gray hulls of American destroyers in Hormuz, a relentless chaos is bleeding into the Red Sea. Cornered and desperate, Iran has unleashed its regional proxies. The Houthis, armed and funded by Tehran, have ruthlessly escalated their missile and drone attacks on civilian cargo ships in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It is a calculated distraction, an attempt to stretch the American Navy thin across two critical geostrategic straits. But the primary crosshairs of the Pentagon remain fixed firmly on Hormuz. The blockade is in effect, but the waters of the strait are an absolute nightmare for traditional naval warfare. While American ships are masterpieces of modern technology, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy is not trying to fight a conventional war. They are executing a deeply insidious, highly asymmetric naval guerrilla warfare doctrine. In the narrow, shallow, and unpredictable currents of Hormuz, Iran has amassed an armada of over 800 speedboats. These are not ordinary boats. These are Bagamar, Zulfikar, and Ashura-class fast attack crafts capable of tearing across the water at terrifying speeds exceeding 50 knots. They are heavily modified, welded with heavy machine guns, anti-armor rocket launchers, and anti-ship missiles. They are designed for one purpose: to swarm. Iran's infamous swarm tactic is a mathematical nightmare for a ship's defense system. The goal is not to sink an American destroyer with a single shot. The goal is to send dozens, perhaps hundreds of these cheap, agile boats simultaneously from every direction, overwhelming the multi-billion-dollar ship's radar and depleting its ammunition. They want to bleed the American defense grids dry, leaving a billion-dollar piece of American sovereignty helpless in the water. In the Strait of Hormuz, where the navigable channel is only miles wide, the distance between an American sailor and an Iranian rocket launcher is no longer measured in miles. It is measured in meters. It is a knife fight in a phone booth. If that wasn't terrifying enough, the threat from above and below is equally lethal. The Tehran regime has built a massive arsenal of long-range kamikaze drones, including the notorious Shahad 136 variants and Mohajer series drones. They plan to blacken the sky with hundreds of these flying bombs, attacking in synchronized waves designed to crash into the radar arrays and flight decks of the carrier group. And meters beneath the surface of the dark water lies an invisible hell. The Iranian Navy has seeded the depths with hundreds of primitive but devastatingly effective moored and magnetic sea mines, secretly dropped from small fishing deos and speedboats in the dead of night. These silent killers drift randomly with the ocean currents. Their exact locations are impossible to pinpoint, posing a catastrophic risk to the gigantic masses of steel trying to navigate the channel. The stakes are unimaginably high. If a single American warship is heavily damaged, if a single American pilot is shot down, it carries the potential to embolden Tehran and send shockwaves through the American political landscape. But the United States Central Command has made its calculation. There will be no retreat. There will be no compromise. To bow to Iranian blackmail today in the Persian Gulf is to invite Chinese aggression in the South China Sea tomorrow, or Russian expansion in Eastern Europe the day after. The blockade will hold, and Iran's ports, the absolute lifeblood of their heavily sanctioned economy, will be paralyzed. Iran knows they are suffocating, and in their desperation, they are escalating the war of nerves by the hour. The northern coast of the Strait of Hormuz is a rugged, unforgiving landscape of jagged mountains and deep ravines. Hidden within this treacherous terrain are hundreds of mobile anti-ship missile launchers and secret subterranean drone facilities, carved deep into the rock, invisible to the prying eyes of American spy satellites. They harbor deadly supersonic cruise missiles like the Nur, the Gadir, and the Khalij Fars. These weapons are specifically designed to skim just feet above the ocean surface, avoiding radar detection until the absolute last possible second before slamming into the hull of a ship. But anyone who thinks the United States military, the most sophisticated and lethal war machine ever assembled in the history of human civilization, walked into this unprepared is severely mistaken. The Pentagon has been wargaming this exact scenario for decades, and their countermove is a symphony of pure, unadulterated devastation. Washington's first move in the event of a hot war will not be defensive. It will be an unprecedentedly massive, overwhelming air campaign designed to completely obliterate Iran's stockpiles of missiles and drones before they ever leave their launch pads. Enter the A-10 Thunderbolt II, known affectionately by the infantry and feared universally by the enemy as the Warhog. This aircraft is a legendary monster of the sky, a flying tank designed for one specific, brutal purpose: close air support and the total annihilation of enemy armor. In the constricted, claustrophobic battlefield of the Strait of Hormuz, the A-10 is the ultimate apex predator. Mounted on its nose is the terrifying 30mm GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon, firing nearly 4,000 rounds of depleted uranium armor, piercing incendiary shells per minute. This gun does not just shoot. It unleashes a deafening roar, a wall of kinetic energy capable of tearing Iran's fast, agile fiberglass attack boats into unrecognizable shreds of burning debris in the blink of an eye. In recent weeks, the United States has quietly but deliberately doubled the number of A-10s deployed to the Middle East. Dozens of these veteran lethal aircraft are now aggressively patrolling at extremely low altitudes right over the dark waters of the Strait, virtually suffocating the Iranian naval elements, daring them to leave the safety of their coastal caves. But swatting the speedboats is only the first phase. The true existential threat lies deep inside the Iranian mountains in the concrete bunkers housing the massive ballistic and anti-ship missile batteries. To solve this problem, the United States relies on the heavy hitters, high above the cloud cover, boasting massive radar signatures that scream absolute confidence the strategic bombers have arrived. Giant B-52 Stratofortresses and sleek supersonic B-1 Lancer bombers have made the intercontinental journey, taking off from Royal Air Force Fairford in the United Kingdom, crossing oceans and continents to reach the strike zone. They are currently circling, waiting for a single encrypted transmission from Central Command. When that order comes, it will bring absolute hellfire. These steel giants are armed to the teeth with massive precision-guided bunker-buster munitions. Iran spent decades and billions of dollars carving into solid rock and pouring thousands of tons of reinforced concrete to hide their weapons. The American bombers possess the terrifying firepower required to turn those subterranean fortresses into collapsing tombs in a single perfectly executed sortie. The US military doctrine here is exceedingly clear, crisp, and utterly ruthless. You do not try to catch the arrow in mid-flight. You strike the archer directly in the heart, and you smash his bow into dust. Instead of waiting for those deadly cruise missiles to swarm the American fleet, the Air Force will wipe the launch batteries, the command and control centers, the radar dishes, and the generals giving the orders straight off the face of the earth forever. This devastating airstrike plan entirely neutralizes the Tehran regime's ultimate blackmail. For years, they have held the world hostage with the threat of turning Hormuz into an inferno, but the Iranian generals sitting in their underground bunkers know the terrifying truth. The very second they give the order to fire their first anti-ship missile, they are signing their own death warrants. They will be drawing the massive, unchecked fury and absolute destructive capacity of United States air power directly down upon their own heads. Trying to fight a war in a sky where air superiority is under the absolute, undisputed control of American stealth fighters is not a gamble, it is suicide. Yet, the unpredictability of war remains. Those dark, shallow waters do not entirely rule out the nightmare scenario. There is always the statistical possibility that a single kamikaze drone or a sea-skimming missile fired from a rogue launcher could slip through the electronic warfare nets and strike a billion-dollar destroyer. Beneath the surface, the war is already hot. Artificial intelligence-equipped knife-fish autonomous underwater vehicles are fighting a relentless, silent, and deadly war on the seabed. These highly advanced robotic submarines are hunting down and detonating Iran's primitive mine network, clearing the path inch by inch. If that rusty lock on the strait is not shattered soon, if the blockade drags on for months, the tension will stretch until something snaps. But to understand the true magnitude of this crisis, you must pull back the curtain of military hardware and look at the massive invisible web of global economics. The United States did not just deploy 100,000 troops in a carrier strike group simply to teach Iran a lesson in naval etiquette. There is a much deeper, far more insidious, and exponentially more dangerous game being played on the geopolitical chessboard. The moment the American blockade was announced, global maritime logistics descended into absolute chaos. Massive supertankers carrying millions of barrels of crude oil, ships the size of skyscrapers, slammed on their brakes in the middle of the ocean. They are drastically altering their courses, fleeing toward the safer waters of the Gulf of Oman, terrified of being caught in the crossfire of an American military operation. But where does a world suddenly starved of Middle Eastern oil turn for energy? The President of the United States stepped to the podium and delivered a statement that sent shockwaves through the global financial markets. He stated, with absolute confidence, that the ships turning around are now heading to the United States to buy American oil. He pointed to the American Gulf Coast, declaring that the United States will fill those massive ships with the sweetest, highest quality crude on the planet. This is the brilliant, devastating reality of the blockade. The American wall of steel drawn across the Persian Gulf has frozen the global oil flow from America's enemies. Simultaneously, massive empty tankers on the high seas are being forcibly redirected to U.S. ports on the coasts of Texas and Louisiana. The American energy sector is exploding, filling the void created by the blockade, while the Tehran regime is literally suffocating. Iran relies on exporting 2 to 3 million barrels of oil a day. It is the sole lifeblood of their shattered economy, the only thing keeping the Ayatollahs in power. The sudden violent severing of this artery is a fatal blow to a regime already hanging by a thread, but Iran is merely a pawn in this grand strategy. The true target, the country drawing the biggest crisis card in this high-stakes game of global roulette, is not Iran, it is the People's Republic of China. China is the factory of the world. To keep its massive industrial gears turning, to prevent its economy from collapsing, Beijing requires an astonishing 11.6 million barrels of crude oil every single day, and nearly 20% of that oil comes directly from Iran. But the true danger to the United States is not just that China buys Iranian oil, it is how they buy it. For years, the Beijing regime has been actively and aggressively bypassing American sanctions. They have been purchasing millions of barrels of Iranian crude not with the United States dollar, but with their own currency, the Chinese yuan. This is a silent, profound, and deeply dangerous rebellion against the American global financial system. The United States dollar is the reserve currency of the world because the world buys oil with it. The petrodollar is the foundation of American economic supremacy. By trading in yuan, China and Iran are actively attempting to dethrone the dollar. The Iranian parliament even established a toll booth system in Hormuz, prioritizing Chinese vessels and collecting transit fees in yuan and untraceable cryptocurrencies, completely freezing out American banks. Therefore, the United States blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is not a coincidence. It is not just a reaction to a radio warning. It is a meticulously designed, flawlessly timed operation intended to shatter the de-dollarization alliance between Beijing and Tehran. Washington has trapped China. Nearly 50% of China's total crude oil imports must pass through the Strait of Hormuz. There is no alternative geographical route, and the lock to that strait is now firmly gripped by the United States Navy. If the Chinese Communist Party cannot secure its massive shipments of cheap sanctioned oil from Iran, they have a terrifying mathematical problem. They will inevitably be forced to reroute their massive fleets of cargo ships to buy oil from the United States or from American allies in the Gulf who abide by US sanctions. And when they do, Beijing will be forced to conduct that massive volume of trade using the SWIFT banking system. They will be forced to pay in United States dollars. In a single sweeping military maneuver, the de-dollarization strategy that China has spent decades weaving stitch by stitch across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East is facing total collapse against the 127mm deck guns of American destroyers. The United States is using its military supremacy to enforce its economic supremacy, bleeding Iran dry while forcing China to bend the knee to the almighty dollar. But this brilliant trap has a deeply terrifying catch. What happens if China refuses to submit? What happens if the Chinese Communist Party decides that bowing to the American blockade is a humiliation they cannot survive? The real apocalypse, the spark that could instantly ignite World War III, will happen the moment China decides to call the American bluff. Imagine the scenario. A massive Chinese supertanker, longer than the Empire State Building is tall, carrying 2 million barrels of Iranian oil, appears on the horizon. Flying the red flag of the People's Republic of China, it steams directly toward the blockade line in international waters. The American destroyers, forming an unbreakable wall of gray steel, train their targeting radars and their massive guns directly at the approaching behemoth. Radio warnings are issued, sirens wail. Will the United States Navy show the resolve to fire upon, forcibly stop, and board a sovereign Chinese vessel in the middle of the ocean? If the United States fires a warning shot or disables the ship, Beijing will instantly declare it a direct violation of their sovereignty, an act of piracy, and a formal casus belli, an act of war. But if the American commanders blink, if Washington orders the destroyers to stand down and allows the Chinese ship to pass safely through the blockade to avoid a global war, the illusion of American supremacy shatters instantly. Trump's all-or-nothing masterstroke will collapse into absolute humiliation. If America blinks in Hormuz, the sharks will smell blood in the water. Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia will realize the US security umbrella is a myth, and they will rapidly pivot their alliances toward Beijing. The deterrence in the Pacific will evaporate overnight. Xi Jinping, watching from Beijing, will realize that if America will not fight for the Persian Gulf, they certainly will not fight for Taipei. The timeline for a full-scale Chinese invasion of Taiwan will instantly accelerate. Everything rests on the fortitude, the iron will, and the absolute resolve the United States demonstrates in the dark waters of Hormuz. Military strategists and geopolitical analysts are watching the monitors with cold sweats. This is no longer a localized conflict with a rogue state in the Middle East. China's silent but profound economic desperation has elevated this standoff into what could become the most devastating economic and military crisis in the history of human civilization. When that massive Chinese oil tanker finally appears on the horizon, breaking through the morning fog of the Persian Gulf and the American destroyers lock their weapons, the entire world will hold its breath. The curiosity over who will pull the first trigger will not just dictate the news cycle. It will violently and irreversibly redraw the global map, the global economy, and the balance of power for the next century. So the question falls to you. As we stand on the precipice of one of the most critical and dangerous thresholds in world history, does the United States have the ironclad resolve to fully maintain this deadly blockade? Can American military might successfully sever China's massive oil veins and crush the rebellion against the dollar? Or will Iran's insidious asymmetric warfare, combined with Beijing's massive global economic leverage, break the American wall of steel and create a terrifying new world order? The trap is set, the pieces are on the board, and the clock is ticking down to zero.